This is a restricted area, sir. Military funeral, 4-star general. No clearance, no entry. The soldier's voice was flat. No emotion, no hesitation. He stood rigid, eyes locked on the clipboard in his hands, as if the man standing in front of him simply didn't exist. Beyond the Iron Gate was another world. American flags lined the sky like waves of red, white, and blue. A brass band in full-dress uniform stood in formation under the searing Virginia sun. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession, like silent gunfire honoring the dead. A national funeral was underway. General Marcus Callahan, decorated war hero, battlefield legend, the man who wore 4 stars on his shoulders, was being laid to rest with every sacred rite the United States could offer. But the man at the gate wasn't on the list. No name, no badge, no medals, no rank, just a faded military uniform and a wilted white flower wrapped in a scrap of cloth. He didn't argue, didn't plead, didn't ask why. He simply nodded once and stepped back, settling into the corner of the wall, like rejection was something he had worn on his shoulders his whole life. No one knew who he was. No one cared who he might have been. But in just a few minutes, the entire country would stop for him. Morning at Arlington was quiet, like sacred ground. Maple leaves rustled gently in the early autumn breeze. American flags lined the walkway, each one snapping in the wind like whispered farewells. The military band rehearsed slow, solemn notes that echoed across the valley. The honor guard moved in perfect unison, every step falling with such precision. It felt as if even the earth bowed in respect. They were preparing for a high-ranking ceremony, a funeral not meant for the forgotten. 30 meters beyond the gate, just outside the ceremonial perimeter, stood Ezekiel Brown. Black, 78 years old, still, silent, like a piece of history someone tried to leave behind. His shirt was neatly pressed, hat tilted just right. In his hand, a single white flower, already beginning to wilt. But his eyes, sunken, weary, carried the weight of decades others had tried to erase. 2 nearby officers whispered to each other, "Look at him, probably waiting for someone to toss him a sandwich. Doesn't look like a guest." The other chuckled, quietly, just loud enough for them to share the joke. Zeke didn't react. Maybe he didn't hear, or maybe he'd heard that kind of laughter so many times before, he no longer flinched. That laugh, the kind that didn't need to insult you directly, just needed to exist, and it was enough to push you to the margins. He wasn't asking for pity. He wasn't there to be noticed. He had come to stand near the man who had once been his brother in arms and say goodbye. But even that, just that small thing, for a black soldier like him, seemed too much to ask. Zeke had left home at 4 a.m., a long Greyhound ride from Georgia to Richmond, then a transfer to a local bus, swaying through quiet suburban streets, where strangers glanced at him like he'd taken a wrong turn in someone else's world. The final stretch, he walked nearly a mile. His old leather boots, heels worn thin, were still polished to a shine. No one was waiting for him. No one knew he was coming. He had nothing but a faded uniform, a frayed unit patch, and a single white flower wrapped in a handkerchief. The only thing he thought worthy of bringing. As he approached the gate, a young officer stepped forward, white, early 30s. He looked Zeke up and down, his eyes lingering just a moment too long on the skin, the calloused hands. His voice carried the weight of routine and distance. "Good morning. Your name's not on the guest list. May I ask in what capacity you're attending? Are you family to General Callahan?" Zeke gave a quiet shake of the head. "Number not family. I just pulled him out of enemy fire." K-san. 1968. A pause. The young officer blinked, then offered a faint smile, the kind you give when someone tells you a story you've heard one too many times and never really believed. Strange. All these years, I don't recall the general ever mentioning a Zeke Brown. The words weren't loud, they weren't cruel, but they cut, like a cold, clean knife, straight through the years the world tried to erase. Zeke didn't flinch, just nodded, eyes fixed on the ground. He'd heard those words too many times before, in classrooms, in hospitals, in churches. Never heard of you. And maybe that was how the world dealt with men like him. Not by denying them, not by honoring them, but by quietly brushing them aside. Among the rows of white-draped seats reserved for generals and dignitaries, Colonel Jacob Monroe, silver-haired, uniform crisp and flawless, was quietly scanning the perimeter, eyes trained on every corner of the funeral ground. Then he froze. Not because of anything threatening, not because someone moved the wrong way that no one else seemed to notice. A faded silver triangle patch on the left shoulder of the man outside the gate. He squinted, and suddenly his throat tightened. Ghost Recon, Charlie Company, K-san, 1968. Number. No way. Colonel Monroe shot to his feet. His hand clenched the sleeve of his coat, knuckles white, and like a monsoon hitting the jungle at night, the memories came pouring back. He bent down, leaning in close to the ear of General Andrew Pierce, seated directly in front of him, and whispered urgently, "Sir, that man out there, if it weren't for him, William Callahan would have died that night. I was there. I owe that man my life." General Pierce went still. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward the iron gate. At that very moment, the sun broke through the oak trees and cast a clear light across Zeke's face. Same faded uniform, same hand, holding that single white flower. But this time, someone was looking at him not with suspicion, but with memory. General Pierce said nothing, but a command was given, without a single word. 2 aides moved swiftly toward security. Another ran back toward the main stage, and for a brief, breathless moment, the entire funeral paused, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Because now, the question wasn't, who is that man? It was, why is someone like him standing outside the gate? The bugle was easing into the solemn notes of taps, the final farewell played at military funerals across generations. Cameras swept slowly across the honor guard, capturing the precise, almost sacred movement of each soldier. Guests adjusted their jackets. The final moments of the ceremony were in place. Everything was ready for a perfect farewell. Until General Andrew Pierce stood up. No announcement, no nod to the ceremony conductor. He stepped past the rows in front of him, walking with a calm that somehow felt heavier than silence, as if the most important moment of the day wasn't part of the program. His boots struck the gravel differently, firm, deliberate, unstoppable. A guard moved to stop him, but was waved off before a word left his mouth. The iron gate didn't open with a key. It opened with the hand of a 4-star general. Outside, Zeke Brown hadn't moved. He didn't know what was happening, didn't dare let himself imagine. He just held the white flower tighter, as if it were the last thing anchoring him to this world. General Pierce stopped in front of him, no more than 3 steps away. He straightened his buttons, took a deep breath, then raised his hand, and saluted, not as a favor, not as a gesture, but as protocol, to a peer, a brother, a man whose name belonged. His voice wasn't loud, but it rang clear, cutting through the fence, through the wind, and into every single ear present. "Sergeant Brown, we've been waiting for you. 54 years. Zeke didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes wide, as if a life spent outside the circle had just been invited back in. Across the funeral grounds, the cameras stopped. Reporters lowered their lenses. The crowd fell silent, not because they were told to, but because they knew. History was being rewritten, right here, right now. No one moved, no one spoke, only the wind whispered, sending red maple leaves skimming gently across the perfectly trimmed grass. General Andrew Pierce turned and signaled his aide. A small wooden box, hand-polished, trimmed with elegant brass, was placed into his hands. Inside was the ashes of General Marcus Callahan, the man the nation had just laid to rest. Pierce turned back to face Zeke Brown. He didn't use grand words, no flourishes, no speeches. He simply bowed his head, the kind of bow a man in power gives to someone the world had forgotten. General Callahan left one final request, that only one man would carry him back to the earth. And that man is Sergeant Zeke Brown. Zeke stood frozen. He didn't reach out right away, because deep inside, a part of him still didn't believe this world even remembered his name. But the eyes of General Pierce and the reverent silence around them said everything. Today, he was no longer invisible. Slowly, Zeke reached out his hand, and when his fingers touched the wood, it felt like the whole cemetery exhaled. Behind them, the honor guard, young men, most not even 30, rose to their feet. Not by command, not by protocol, but because something in their hearts told them. They were standing in front of a man who truly knew the battlefield, who understood sacrifice, who carried 50 years of silence with him. One by one, they raised their hands in salute, eyes locked on the old soldier, back slightly bent, but hands steady as ever, like the day he ran through gunfire in Khe Sanh. A general had just been laid to rest, but a hero finally had been called by name. Khe Sanh, Quang Tri Province, February 1968. Wind howled night through the jungle like a wounded beast. Artillery thundered non-stop, matching the rhythm of a terrified heart. Mud swallowed boots to the ankle. Smoke and mist fused into one choking fog, turning the outpost into a waking nightmare. Sergeant Zeke Brown was 22nd Recon Unit, Charlie Company, the last surviving scout, a quiet black man among dozens of white soldiers. Then came the radio call, frantic, cracking through the static. "Delta 9's been ambushed. Callahan's hit. We're pinned down. West runway." No one moved, not just out of fear, but because that sector was a death zone. No light, no backup, no way in. Zeke didn't wait for orders. He shoved 2 smoke grenades and a flare into his shirt and ran straight into the dark. Gunfire tore the air to shreds, but Zeke crawled, past shattered trees, over enemy corpses, through rain and blood and fire, until he reached them. 2 bodies curled behind a smoldering fuel drum. Lieutenant Marcus Callahan, blood soaking his shoulder, vision fading. Next to him, Captain Monroe, hands trembling, clutching an empty Colt. "Forgot your map, didn't you?" Zeke muttered. Then, without waiting for an answer, he grabbed their collars and dragged them. Smoke. Flare. One bullet tore into his shoulder. But he kept running until the perimeter lights finally caught him staggering through the wire. The next morning, a medic said he'd be nominated for the Medal of Honor. Zeke just smiled. "Don't bother. A black grunt saving 2 white officers? No paper's gonna print that. Let 'em believe they crawled out on their own. I don't need a name in a headline." And that's exactly what happened. No articles, no photos, no ceremony. Just a soldier, erased from history. General Andrew Pierce stepped onto the podium. The wind stopped. Even the birds fell silent, as if nature itself understood that something more important than ceremony was about to begin. He held no paper, didn't glance at a script. He looked straight ahead, at the man in the faded uniform, standing beneath the shade of a tree, holding the box of ashes. Ladies and gentlemen, today I don't want to speak about General Marcus Callahan, not because he isn't worthy, but because he wouldn't be here today, if not for a man none of you have ever heard of. Silence fell like a blanket. Heads turned, eyes shifted toward Zeke, the quiet black man who, until this moment, had been just another shadow in the national portrait. In 1968, in Khe Sanh, hell on earth, a soldier disobeyed orders, ran through fire and gunshots, and saved 2 officers left behind. One of them was me. The other was Marcus Callahan. And that soldier was Sergeant Ezekiel Brown. Zeke lowered his head. He wasn't used to being spoken of, especially not like this. But General Pierce kept going. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of a shame history tried to bury. We were honored, promoted, our names etched into history books. But him? He was not. Because his skin was darker, because his name didn't roll off the tongue, because when the war ended, America wanted to remember what was comfortable, not what was true. He turned back to the crowd, raised his hand, pointed directly at Zeke. If you've ever been inspired by a hero, stand up and show this man. He was never forgotten. And across the cemetery, row by row, person by person, they rose, not by command, not by tradition, but because gratitude could no longer stay silent. The ceremony was over. The flag, folded into a perfect triangle, had been handed to the family. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind a silence that settled gently among rows of white headstones. Zeke Brown stood alone before a freshly carved grave. The stone read, General Marcus J. Callahan, brother, commander, friend. He slowly knelt. His left hand placed the ashes down beside the grave. His right reached into his pocket and pulled out a stick of incense, something never included in military protocol, but always present in the culture of men who had once fought far from home. The flame flickered. Smoke curled skyward in the crisp autumn air. Zeke spoke softly, not to be heard, but to remember. You always hated white flowers, Callahan, but today I didn't bring anything else. Just an old promise, and these tired legs, still strong enough to make it here. Behind him, footsteps approached, soft but certain. General Pierce stood there. He said nothing at first. Then slowly, he reached into his chest pocket and pulled out a small envelope, its edges yellowed with time. He left this for you, Pierce said quietly. But he made it clear, only to be delivered, if you actually made it here. We didn't think you would, but he never doubted you. Zeke took the envelope. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. The handwriting was uneven, brief, just a single passage. Zeke, no medal could ever be enough. You pulled me out of that night. If my name is remembered, I want it carved beside yours. Callahan. Zeke folded the letter, held it as if it were something sacred. Then he looked up at the pale gray sky and exhaled. Slow and steady. He didn't cry, but something fell. Quiet, invisible, and even the wind didn't dare carry it away. Spring hadn't quite arrived, but the first green buds were already pushing out on the old oak tree at the center of the lawn. The breeze was light. The sun was pale. The dedication ceremony unfolded in quiet dignity, as if the entire event had been designed for those who had lived most of their lives in silence. Above the main entrance arch, etched in gleaming brass letters that caught the morning light, Zeke Brown Veterans Center. Not a place to showcase medals, not to retell war stories, but a space to heal, the kind of wounds no one ever sees on skin. The Rehabilitation Center was built through a special allocation from the Callahan Legacy Fund, personally approved by General Pierce and the Department of Defense. It offered trauma counseling, physical therapy, and a shared space for veterans returning not with flags or parades, but with quiet scars no one ever asked about. Guests lined the lawn, generals, nurses, young soldiers, and old men with canes, all waiting for a speech from the man whose name was now on the building. But Zeke Brown never took the stage. He stood under the old oak at the edge of the lawn, the very spot where he'd been turned away 1 year earlier. Same worn coat, same carefully polished shoes, and in his hand, another white flower, wilted. He didn't wave, didn't speak, didn't take the microphone. He simply watched, as one by one, young veterans stepped through the door, their eyes uncertain, but not without hope. Beside him, General Pierce leaned in and said quietly, "You know, we call this a center. But really, it's a thank you. For the ones who never asked to be thanked." Zeke didn't turn, didn't answer. He just nodded, the kind of nod soldiers give when nothing more needs to be said. There are men who come and go without their names ever making it into the pages of history. No statues, no commemorative days. Just a worn footprint in the grass of a cemetery, and a memory passed quietly from one soldier to another, like an invisible medal that never fades. Ezekiel Brown never needed cameras, never wanted a stage, not even forgiveness. All he ever needed was to be remembered. Just once, truly, and America remembered. On the day an old black man, 79 years old, walked slowly through a national cemetery, holding a cap embroidered with the words, "Ghost Recon, Laos, 1970. Not to attend a funeral, but to escort a man once praised as a hero to his final rest. Not as a footnote, but as the man who saved his life. As Zeke Brown walked past rows of folding chairs, hundreds of young soldiers, none of whom had ever met him, rose to their feet. Not because someone barked an order, not because the cameras were rolling, but because they knew that man was the reason they were still standing. One member of the honor guard whispered, "He doesn't need to be remembered by name, because he's the first chapter in every lesson we'll ever learn about honor." As the evening breeze swept through the old oak trees, the final salute didn't come in words, just a single gesture, enough to silence an entire nation. There are those who don't need cameras, don't need medals, don't need speeches. They just need to be remembered. And Ezekiel Brown was remembered the right way, at the right time.